Hey guys, Letitia here from Mindset 2.0, sitting down with someone that I found 2-3 weeks ago. So excited to talk to Sharna RT. She's a transpersonal psychologist, a somatic psychotherapist, and the director of Oxhead School of Personal Psychology. All the interests that I'm into and more rolled into one. Sharna, thanks for being so friendly, coming on the show.
Thank you for
so appreciative. Sharna, one question. Why did you name your school/business Oxhead, out of curiosity?
Well, the Oxhead School was a school that was founded in China in around 600 AD. And it was a very short-lived Zen school. And it was short-lived because it didn't advocate too much practice. It wasn't, many schools of Zen Buddhism are quite formal, whereas the Oxheads believed that we can get trapped by practices. And that it's not a one-size-fits-all with spiritual development. So I wanted to imbue my school with those qualities, that we weren't going to get fixated on formal practice. And I think the danger with different spiritual branches is that there's a lot of dogma and doctrine, and this is where we get cults and things like that.
The reason I asked is because Aries 1985 is the year of the ox, so I thought it had something to do with astrology, but clearly not.
No, I stole it from these beautiful Zen masters who left us the most incredible literature, and a true pointing that if you want to find spiritual freedom, many things you can do, but it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely. Now, Sharna, can you please tell our audiences, as well as myself, what is transpersonal psychology, the definition, and what does it mean?
Transpersonal psychology, well, if you look at the word transpersonal, trans is a prefix that means to go beyond, so it's going beyond the person.
Love it.
And psychology itself is study of the spirit, but transpersonal psychology is a branch of psychology that is kind of trying to live up to its original name. Psychology was always meant to be somewhat spiritual.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
And so transpersonal psychology is kind of reclaiming its more, during the Renaissance period, it was considered to be the area of human endeavor that was looking at the spirit. And so with transpersonal psychology, we really believe that the quest to have mystical experiences, to have non-ordinary states, is not only really important, one of the most important drives, that they're incredibly useful for healing, problem solving, but the problem's been that within psychology they have tended to pathologize certain states. There's still to this day, you could have had a mystical experience, like an awakening, and you go see a psychiatrist and they're going to give you a diagnosis. Rather than honouring.
Is that because they try to prove everything with science?
Well, yes, psychology has tried to affiliate itself with the medical, being a branch of medicine. And medicine is, very scientific, also very mechanistic. And so by psychology affiliating itself with medicine, we kind of lost, the value of the spiritual side.
When did psychology become like this?
Predominantly in the 40s and 50s, a new branch of psychology called behaviorism came in, which was very useful for understanding how emotions and thoughts dictate behavior. But its problem was that it was basing a lot of these findings off animal experimentation. And certainly while we do share a lot of experiences with the animal kingdom, things like falling in love, or I don't know, even things such as poetry and art.
Animals don't fall in love, do they?
Well, I'm sure there's, but we as a species, I guess we are more conscious of that, and we share many traits with mammals and so forth, but there are certainly distinct things, and maybe one aspect is the human spirit. And so it was from that point in time, with behaviorism becoming the dominant school of psychology, that we started to view the human condition and the human being as almost like a biological machine that is conditioned by its environment. And we lost a lot of the beauty and the poetry that I think belongs to.
Absolutely. Who was one of your favorite psychologists that you look up to, that you admire for his teachings back in the days?
Well, certainly Carl Jung.
Oh, wow.
And so he was an early pioneer during the very infancy of Western psychology, coming from Freud.
Okay. Freud.
He was one of the pioneers, along with Freud, and there was a whole number of them. Wilhelm Reich was there. There was Adler, but Jung was really into the spiritual. So, of course, I feel very affiliated with his work. I also really admire his journey.
Okay.
And he also wouldn't, towards the end of his life, he didn't see a client or a patient without first looking at their astrology chart.
Wow, love that.
So because
I would have forced him to see me. Carry on.
Yeah,
you too. Nice.
So yes, he was into astrology and kept it under wraps because he didn't want to damage his academic reputation too much. But
what a shame.
Yeah.
Carry on.
But yes, very much into understanding, the spiritual dimensions, the unconscious, and the power of symbolism.
Wow, love that. I'm not very well versed with Freud, but what was your opinion with Freud for those watching?
He got it right in many respects.
A lot of his sexuality was back to parents, wasn't it? Issues with sexuality.
Yes, he had his libido. He was very precious about his libido theory, that most of our psychological problems were based upon some kind of complex around our sexuality. But he was very affiliated with like Newtonian notions and was quite mechanistic. He hated that Jung was so spiritual. In fact, it was part of the reason they kind of parted ways. And Jung became like the outcast member of the psychoanalytical community because of his insistence of wanting to honor the spiritual.
Absolutely.
And Freud wasn't for that. So
then I think I definitely like Jung more.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, one thing that I'm going to say is I haven't studied Freud too much, and I will, but one thing that I remember is when I was little, my mum she was young. She used to go to the bathroom and leave the door open sometimes. I really did not like seeing her nude in any capacity, even in the shower. Sometimes as an adult, I've had flashbacks and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. So I'd love to just dwell deep into that one day to see why it bothers me.
Yeah.
Why would that bother me or a child?
Well, I guess that's one thing that Freud did mention, that the exposure to sexuality around 3 to 7 years of age, seeing the opposite sex genitals and your parents could certainly create so many different, neurotic tendencies.
Yes.
Even toilet training.
Yes.
If toilet training is not handled very well, you can perhaps be years later having to explore what's going on in that period of your life.
Absolutely. There's definitely a trigger there. So for my own self-discovery, and because I love psychology, I'm going to go deeper into it. So the next question is, you said that from the transpersonal perspective, the manifestations of symptoms. So you said that from the transpersonal perspective, the manifestation of symptoms are often best understood as marking the beginning of a healing process rather than the beginning of a disease or disorder. Can we talk about this, please? That's a bit of a long one. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the problems with how mechanistic psychology is that we see the symptom as being something to get rid of, rather than seeing the symptom as perhaps signifying something that needs our attention. And so in many ways...
Give us an example.
Well, I think even depression, often, when we go into these deep contractions, when we're not living the life we're meant to be living, and then we kind of go into a shutdown, or the old-fashioned existential crisis, and these are not fun times to go through, but I think They represent a part of your unconscious asking for a radical upgrade, asking for you to address certain aspects of your life that need more attention, and not working against us as much as mainstream psychology has us believe.
Sure. So hence why you said that the manifestation of symptoms are often best understood as marking the beginning of a healing process. So if we see it as a healing process and something that could be a positive,
yes,
rather than negative in an ending, that's
yes.
good.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, look, there's certain, psychiatric conditions that are, devastating to the individual, but particularly with the mood disorders, anxiety, depression, we're starting to see how many of our, most troubling psychological issues are usually based on unresolved business from our past, things that have happened in childhood, even just the stress of living in the modern world. And our body-mind systems are really good at showing us where we need to move and shift, and the symptoms take us right to that place. Obviously, then you need to engage in some kind of process that usually tries to understand the background of the symptom.
Go to the core.
Yeah, to go to the core, to see what is facilitating it. And that's where with psychology, a lot of mainstream psychology, and particularly psychiatry, is all about repressing the symptom.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a time and place for that. I'm not anti, psychotropic or pharmaceutical supports when need be. But sometimes, you're really blocking an individual being able to, come to really heal and transform.
To self-reflect and heal. Private conversation I had with Sharna when I got here, I asked her a simple question. She goes, it's okay. Feel it. Stop suppressing. Because I was suppressing and saying, nah, I don't care. You do care because it's on your mind. So one thing I'm going to do is start feeling my feelings in regards to certain things.
Yes, if nothing else you take from the interview.
There's going to be so much I take from this. I've recently come across the word somatic. What is somatic psychotherapy, please?
Somatic psychotherapy is a form of psychotherapy that really understands that the body holds the problem. Even a lot of our character defenses are not just governed by the mind, but are, set deeply in our body. But it's also a form of therapy that uses the body to access, a kind of inner healing process. It's been around, traditionally, somatic psychotherapy has been around, since the early 1900s in the Western tradition. But I think we need to honour the fact that, for thousands of years in the Eastern and shamanic traditions, that connection between the body-mind has always been honoured. We've been slow to come to the party in the West, but we're in this great age of somatic psychotherapy due to the neuroscience. The neuroscience has really helped refine and confirm not only our own, how we store trauma in our body, but also our neuroplasticity, our ability to really transcend and move out of limited perspectives that are held mentally and physically.
Sure. Would you be able to give our listeners an example of what you do when it comes to somatic healing? How that looks, what that's like for the visual people?
Well, it's really about going into the problem, as I said, in a very guided way. Often we need to experience, have a situation where there's some kind of re-experiencing of the traumatic event or what's really ailing us emotionally. We're like going to the emotional disturbance and re-experiencing it, often even needing to amplify it by just simply focusing on it. And then we see if we can guide ways, and it usually can happen quite spontaneously by just focusing on the problem. There can be this spontaneous release.
I've got something to say. So the other night I was at home and I started thinking about something that was triggering, what we spoke about before. I started shaking. This shaking was a familiar thing I've done in the past. And I was brave enough in that moment to try to be quiet and listen to why my body's shaking. And due to another healer, spiritual person I spoke to, she had said, be kind to your body, listen to your body. So that's the first time I tried to do that. And I said to my body, what's wrong? Why are you shaking? But I wasn't able to get the answer. Why do you think that occurred? Why would my body start shaking at the thought of that trigger?
Well, often, in fact, when people are releasing trauma from their body, there's this spontaneous tremoring, we call them neurogenic tremors, will occur. And so that can be, you know, a really beneficial kind of release. But a lot of times it's the body's just in a sympathetic fight-flight mode. And of course, it's even with people with anxiety, will often have shaking hands. And the fight-flight mechanism of our nervous system is all about bringing energy to the hands, the feet, certainly speeding up the heart rate, so blood can go to the extremities of the body. And so this is where, when we're in a state of anxiety for a considerable period of time, or going through a stressful situation.
So it's just stress and anxiety in a situation like that where the client starts stressing about it and shaking hard.
Yes, I guess I would distinguish between one where it's a kind of default setting that their nervous system's in, but certainly a lot of times when I'm doing like process-oriented work, the shaking is a really beautiful manifestation of things kind of being released, coming out.
So it's good that I allowed myself to shake.
Yeah, I think so.
Fantastic. You mentioned neuroplasticity. Very interesting. I can't remember what it means, but I remember about 5 years ago I was studying neuroplasticity for a little while, maybe about a week I was into it. Can you tell our viewers, what is neuroplasticity?
Well, I'm not so well versed in the neuroscience, but I must say, but I guess the biggest gift we've gained from understanding a little bit more of the brain is to come to now understand that the brain can heal itself. And even when we've had neural pathways, the old, the neuroscience saying is, neurons that fire together wire together and create neural pathways that can be related to going into emotional states, perpetuating of addictions. And yet we now can see we do have the technologies to shift that and create new neural pathways. And
Dr. Joe Dispenza speaks a lot about this. Could you give us one example of neuroplasticity at work, how someone is trying to fix themselves, create new neural pathways? One example.
One very simple way is phobias. Okay, so with a phobia, there's a stimulus that is setting off, a very heightened trigger.
Response.
And so we now have the techniques. One, for example, is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's just having the person, while the thinking of, like, let's say their phobia is of dogs, they're thinking about a dog, they're allowing themselves to react a little bit, and then you just get their eyes to move from left to right, and it just brings in new information and kind of acts as a short circuiter, and then suddenly you kind of desensitize the response. And over time, mostly, it almost always works. After at least, it may take a few sessions, suddenly the presence of a dog is not triggering.
Do you offer that to clients?
Yes.
Wow, guys. So if you're in Melbourne, hit her up.
Yes, I'm processing a lot of people's, because of the vaccination, people's needle phobias have been, a lot of people have had
interesting.
Phobias around syringes. It's surprisingly common. So.
Okay, interesting. Sharna, what does transpersonal psychology mean? And I apologize for asking such standard questions, but what does that mean?
Well, it's a very all-encompassing branch of psychology. It includes all the major schools of psychology, but with one fundamental distinction. It really emphasizes the importance of the spiritual dimension, and was based upon a discovery that there's many drives within the human individual, but the drive to have a mystical experience is one of the strongest drives we as human beings have. And so transpersonal psychology really emphasizes the importance of that, and has done so also to address a problem that exists within psychology, that many non-ordinary states of consciousness, be it spiritual awakening or having, entering into a state of consciousness that is not so ordinary.
So transpersonal psychology welcomes the mystical and the everything else.
And really highlights that it shouldn't be pathologized.
Absolutely.
There is times and places where even what can look like a psychotic episode, not always, but sometimes it can be incredibly useful for the person in their integration of it.
Yeah. Would you like to hear my random thesis as a non-psychologist? My intuitive thesis is that schizophrenia is different entities communicating with a person. Have you ever felt that way or no?
Oh, that one's a mysterious condition, but I have heard it said, in cultures around the world where the person with having a psychotic, what appears to be a psychotic episode, is really supported by the tribe. Like there's places, I think in Zulu tribes, if someone becomes psychotic, they almost give them a microphone and a stage, and the whole tribe supports them and trusts that they're tapping into other realities.
Yeah.
And
it's just not always a positive reality, I don't believe.
Not always, but it's like almost like they're tuning into different radio stations. I mean, I don't want to minimize how devastating this disorder is, but there is at times a subcategory. It's been in transpersonal psychology, we call it spiritual emergency. It's just a subcategory. Many people have been through this experience where yes, they had reality kind of collapse on them, but some profoundly useful information came in and they described feeling completely transformed by the experience.
They recovered? They came back?
Yes.
Wow.
And really felt that they came to be a more integrated person, not despite that experience, but truly because of it.
I was on the internet a little while ago and I was reading blogs for some unknown reason in regards to people who were going through that or something similar to that, and they were saying that they were getting messages and that they'd follow the messages and they'd find, the message would say, go over here, you'll see this, and they just kept constantly getting the messages, and it was true. Wherever they go, they find whatever else they were meant to find. Hence why that validated what I was thinking. But as Sharna says, I've got no rock solid opinion, obviously. Can you tell us a little bit about the principles, and I don't know how to pronounce this,
Advaita Vedanta.
Or non-duality as some call it, please?
Well, this is a very ancient spiritual tradition that predates Buddhism. I think it goes back all the way back to 800 BC, and the word Advaita Vedanta means it's trying to describe that this reality is one. It's all one.
Love that. Interconnected and one.
But it says so in such a way that it's one without a second. And I love the principles, as much as I'm not a scholar of this spiritual philosophy. Much like Buddhism, I think it has some really sophisticated practices and means of being able to...
Does Deepak Chopra follow this or no?
I dare say yes. Sure. Transcend one's own suffering. It reduces suffering down to a fundamental problem with misidentification as yourself, as the body, mind, ego, where in fact who you really are is Brahman, part of this field of oneness.
I know, but unfortunately we are in this physical vessel, so we do. How can you identify as nothing? So hard.
Well, this is right, and yet, as much as the illusion of us being the person seems very persistent, one can seem to see beyond it, and often our suffering is an opportunity to go beyond that, because often what we are suffering isn't in our immediate vicinity. It's not in the situation. It's in our conceptualization of the situation. It's not our emotions and our sensations.
So we're supposed to just be the observer, Sharna, according to them, just the observers?
It's not, it doesn't really even matter whether you adopt the observing position to who you really are, is what it would say. But if there is a thirst to really go beyond the illusion, it points out some pretty nice ways, and it's a simple, eloquent kind of philosophy, much like very similar to Buddhism.
Okay, so what would life look like for one that practices that?
Well, I think it's traveling a hell of a lot lighter, probably
Wow.
not feeling so insecure.
Wow.
Of course, people think, oh, well, if I adopt this, this perspective, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills, I'm not going to be able to run my business or be a good parent. But paradoxically, I think we can come to live in a more spontaneous way and have more effective coping skills, because I think our survival instincts are built in. It's just that our mind is continually claiming ownership for it.
Yeah, I love philosophy. So I'm going to ask you a philosophy question, or maybe it's still psychology, I'm not sure. But if I was practicing that, when I'm looking at you, what am I seeing? Am I seeing myself or another human being? Am I seeing myself or another human being? What do they believe?
Well, in this philosophy,
yes,
you and I are one. So when you and I are looking into each other's eyes,
I like
we're kind of looking into a mirror.
that.
We're looking into an aspect of ourselves. And what has us believe we're separate is merely a concept where if we drop the thought, you would see that where your awareness begins and ends, we can't find it. And even though we may seem like we're in the skin, that's not how it actually feels when you're in a place of beingness. If we drop this, if you drop the story of Letitia and I drop the story of Sharna, there is actually a very distinct feeling of a unified field of consciousness, of awareness, you could call it, that exists in the body and in the space outside of the body.
Yes. It can be very comforting or uncomfortable depending on where you're at. But another metaphor would be we're all the ocean. We are from the ocean, and she's just one drop and I'm a drop, or we're waves. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I find this comforting, but the only question that comes to mind when we spoke about that is sexuality. So how would someone in an intimate relationship with those belief systems treat sexuality? If it's a good one, isn't it?
Well, yes, I think conceivably it would create a greater sense of union. Maybe that's where.
But are you being in union with yourself because you're one? Is there any excitement?
Yeah, it's probably a little narcissistic. You're making love with yourself. But I mean, I think the more you're out of your own ego-oriented perspective, I think the more you can come into a union with someone and drop your defenses and really merge with them. So,
this is very deep, and I'll probably have to ponder this for about a week and rewind. But on another note, a thought that came to mind was, at this stage, I feel as though, and I don't know what this means, I feel excitement when I feel excited by thinking of someone as the other, not as one. So I'm not sure what that means. I guess it would mean that my world would come crashing down if I realized that Sharna's not really her own person. We're all just one. How does that even work? Philosophy 101.
I know. And it's all very paradoxical, this philosophy. It's almost like it's both. It's both that we're both separate people. And
separate but one.
Separate but one.
Bizarre and interesting.
Exactly.
Awesome. Moving on to the next question. There is a lot of talk about shadow work. I'm not familiar with shadow work. I've heard things about shadow work online. Can you please tell us what's going on with shadow work these days?
Yeah, I know.
What does this mean?
It is, getting thrown around. Shadow work is really, in essence, addressing repressed emotions, negative feelings that have usually come due to our history, and really at the places within ourselves we don't want to look. And the reason it seems so important, and that we almost have Jung described us having a social responsibility to address the parts of ourselves we disown, because of the problem, due to the fact that it will lead to you projecting those qualities outside of you if you don't.
Please explain.
So whatever we don't hate in ourselves, whatever we dislike or repress in ourselves, Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the unconscious has a very clever way of not allowing it to remove itself from your awareness. So it will instead cross the self boundary and then appear as the things outside of you that you really trigger you.
So I don't like judgmental people, but then I judge sometimes. Is that it?
This aspect, yes, it can represent a quality that you actually are demonstrating and possessing, and so that's why you don't you see a part of yourself. But oftentimes it's you've repressed it. You were taught somewhere through.
I was judged, so I don't like it. So I found that's not a nice quality.
Yes,
so how would that manifest?
You disowned your own faculty of judgment.
Oh no!
And so that's why you don't permit yourself to be judgmental. And so when you see someone else being judgmental, it brings up a trigger. And yet judgment's a good example because because I think it is a fundamental survival strategy.
I got lost in all that you said because I'm new to this concept. Would that mean I haven't made good judgments in the past when it comes to people because I've been trying to not be judgmental?
Yes, this is what I've been often coaching clients on the fact that we've been conditioned to believe you're not allowed to judge a book by its cover, give people the benefit of the doubt. But what that robs us from,
you're an instinct.
Our instinct and our intuition that actually may not like one aspect of the person and should really, when I talk to clients who've gotten into abusive relationships, I often ask them, what was your first reaction to that person? And often they'll go, oh, I couldn't stand them, and I really, there was something really off-putting about them, but then I thought about the fact that he or she had a job.
The logical mind.
So the mind was what created the dysfunctional instinct, whereas the body was far more reliable. You ought to be allowing yourself to be more judgmental.
I will be. I'll be taking that on board. For those of we're still learning, one more example of someone doing shadow work. Please explain one more example.
There's so many ways, but
one thing.
Well, I think psychedelic therapies are a very sure way to be addressing certain aspects, because you go so deep within your unconscious. And not only are we exposed in psychedelic work with our what we call the higher unconscious or the higher self, so that's where it can be, really having transcendental kind of blissful, exalted feelings.
Are you supposed to see your negative traits or things you're scared of?
But it also will bring to the surface the shadow material, and in fact, I think that's something that people are not so aware of with psychedelics. Psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers, so they amplify both aspects of the unconscious, the shadow self or the lower self, and the higher self or the higher unconscious.
Interesting. I'm going to put a crazy example out there because it's the first thing that came to mind. Apologies, guys. What if someone has a shadow side where I really don't like this example. It's too dark. Let me just change it for a sec. Hold on.
Well, can I give you a very good example, one that I often use to help explain the repressed shadow. Homophobia, when people are really homophobic around people, gay communities.
Is it because they're scared of being gay?
Because we all have a natural slight aspect of homosexuality to us. And it's due to the fierce rejection of that within ourselves that we find it so uncomfortable outside of ourselves.
Sure. Thank you for explaining. Appreciate it. I find women attractive. I know when a woman's attractive, but so far I found that I don't crave physical intimacy with women, but I find them very attractive. Maybe if we went down that path, I could potentially one day find someone, that I want to be intimate with a woman, because I like to stay open-minded, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just want to share that, guys.
Well, yeah, and because you're aware of that part of yourself, I can it's unlikely that you would be. I
Oh,
already
thank
know
you.
that about you.
Yeah.
You're not homophobic.
I'm
But that's
not.
just one
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
You got to assume with the shadow that whatever you really despise,
Yes.
or whatever really you feel so strongly about, often the opposite is true as well. So
Interesting.
there's an old proverb that explains it. It says, I looked and looked, and this I came to see, that what I thought was you and you was really me and me.
Love that. All right. That's a lot of that's just a lot to ponder over there, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. I saw an article that you wrote in regards to the inner authority tool. I haven't had time to read that. I've added that to my read later. The inner authority tool was created by Dr. Phil Stutz, who specializes in helping people overcome insecurity and shine in the entertainment industry in Hollywood or something along those lines. You must have come across read about the authority tool. What is that about, and how can it help people get over insecurities?
Okay, so Phil Stutz is a psychiatrist who is big in Hollywood. He's kind of infamous in Hollywood. He works with actors, and he's quite he's very controversial in many ways because he's quite hard hitting with his client. He's all about he often tells his patients, to stop being a fucking baby. Sure. But he understands the shadow, and he's come up with techniques to help people in that tough industry of Hollywood to avoid self-sabotaging by embracing the shadow rather than rejecting it. And so the inner authority tool is where, let's say you've got an audition, and you have all these insecurities within you. I'm not going to be pretty enough. They're not going to want me. I'm going to get rejected. And rather than trying to push those feelings away, you create an embodiment, an imagined embodiment of that part of yourself. And, it's going to be your most despicable features in some kind of imagined figure. And you take that part of yourself to the audition, and you make it a secret agreement with that part of yourself, your shadow self, that
you're going to go away for a second.
No, that you and the shadow are in it together.
That's fierce.
Because by doing so, you're going to be much more centered within yourself. Okay. More authentic, and you're going to be actually showing up in a less defensive way, and therefore less likely to sabotage yourself.
Okay, I can't imagine at this very moment how that would be. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to try to implement it. The first thing that comes to mind was no way. I thought I'd have to separate it. Agreement. Hey, you move over there for a second. You can come back later. Yeah,
it's a paradox. But the more you try to disown these parts of yourself, the less compassionate you are to yourself, and the less compassionate you are to others.
I believe it.
No matter who we are, we all have such fundamental humane characteristics and imperfections, and we all make mistakes. And if you can't embrace that, you're in real trouble, I believe.
I'm putting you on the spot, but is there anything you remember from his book or his watching him that stands out to you? An example of him helping a client embody that? Is there anything that you remember?
Not really. It's a long time.
I'll go through it.
But I use it. I used to use it when I was first a psychologist, and I was diagnosed with learning difficulties. So in primary school. And so I would, if I ever felt insecure in a session and felt, that old defectiveness schema come up, I'd connect with little Sharna, who, and instead of trying to push her from awareness, it was inviting her in.
To do what? Just hang out with you?
Yeah, and so that I could be, and be more conscious of her, because by being unconscious of her, that's going to perhaps lead to me pretending to be an all-knowing psychologist and coming across arrogant.
So inviting it makes you more there,
more real,
more empathetic, less defensive, as you said. Now I get it.
Yeah, more conscious. You're just more conscious, so you're less likely to be acting from an unconscious mindset. So paradoxically, less likely to screw up. and more likely to, be able to connect well and be authentic.
So if anybody wants to try that at home, just invite your insecurities in and be like, yeah, it's okay, you're welcome, and continue on with the goal. Is that correct?
That's it.
We'll try that and we'll see how it goes. In the comments, guys, drop it below how you feel about that. And hopefully when I connect with Sharna again in 3-4 months, if I can stalk her, I'll let you know how it went when I've done that. Can we please talk about the consequences of early childhood trauma and abuse and how this manifests into life? It's a broad question, but there's a lot of people out there who are not self-aware, who do no work, they're not even aware of psychology. How does early childhood manifest into your adulthood?
In many different ways. But I often it strikes me as one of the most unfair principles or facts of life as a human, that if you don't get your needs met very early on, if you're not given the love, or you grow up in really tough soil to grow from, that there is a tendency for that to create like a pattern that is very hard to shift from. If you didn't get your needs met as a child, it's likely that it's going to become harder to get your needs met as an adult. And so that's due to how much it can dysregulate the nervous system. Even the science is showing, when you've been around a lot of unsafety as a child, your nervous system's ability to read safety and danger gets really dysregulated. And therefore, you're more likely to go into compromising situations, even not having appropriate boundaries and so forth. And that's the tragic thing. Trauma begets trauma. Unbelievably, though, that's not the end of the story. We're starting to see trauma, in some instances, can be the greatest catalyst for spiritual awakening. Or I even know myself, some of my closest friends, or the people I admire the most, have had the toughest background.
Rumi, an awesome philosopher, had a quote, the darkness is where the light comes in. Exactly. And one night I was watching an awesome movie directed by some Indian Hollywood director, and I was captivated by that quote and why this whole movie was based on the damaged ones are the golden ones. Yes. So I went down that path. I wasn't able to figure out for a few months. Were you able to ever figure out why Rumi came out with that quote, tying it to our mystical and psychological interests?
In fact, this is the new wave. We're in this wave of psychology, which is all about somatic, the somatics. But the more you go into the somatic work, the more you do the inner work, the more you access the transpersonal domains. And we've even had recently one of the highest figures in the somatic psychotherapy world, Peter Levine, who's got a very medical background, very academic. He started to come out and say trauma is often the catalyst for spiritual awakening.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like it's an opportunity through deep suffering. And I'm not wanting to sugarcoat it, because trauma can be
there's beauty in it.
But the trauma can be absolutely devastating for an individual. But it can be the catalyst for really evolving. I don't know. One just has to slay those dragons, and there's often a pot of gold.
And as Sharna said, obviously, some traumatic experiences can be really traumatizing. But for some of us, trauma definitely did make us more artistic and poetic, and we created our best work from those traumatic events. Love that.
Jung would say it like this: the gift is right next to the wound.
Wow. Okay.
So,
that was deep. Love that. You also mentioned that there is no evidence of a certain
holonomic
Spurs mind network with incredible
heuristic
conscious altering potential. You mentioned that there is something. This wasn't a blog article. Please talk about this subject, as I'm completely new to it.
Well, I guess, we're in this incredible age with the neuroscience.
Neuroscience, yes.
And also quantum relativistic physics comes into it to understand this body-mind system is like a hologram, and it belongs as an individual, separate mechanism, but it is connected with a much larger nest of being. And within that interface, we're coming to see that there is just the most miraculous ability to access, and this sounds outlandish, but when I say this, it has been empirically proven, the individual consciousness, it has been confirmed that it is connected with a collective unconscious, meaning the entirety of human civilization's history, every lived experience within the cosmos is somehow embedded within the individual consciousness. And at that interface, you have the most extraordinary healing potential at your back. And it's through certain academic inquiries, schools of inquiry, such as I said, quantum physics, modern consciousness research, these experiential psychotherapies, psychedelic research. We've actually come to confirm these are not just new age.
Obviously, yeah. But I guess it's good that we've come to confirm that.
Yeah, this is right.
Is there an example? I know it's a broad subject. Is there any example you can put out there for the audience that's really curious about this, or is this too much to cover?
One of my teachers, Stanislav Grof, he described in breathwork. Breathwork is an incredible vehicle for accessing things coming from the collective consciousness and accessing the transpersonal domain. And I've seen it myself, but he really came up to collect so many case studies of people coming through these experiences to be able to describe pieces of information that they could not have gotten anywhere else. And one example was during a breath work, a woman felt she entered into the experience of being a mother whale giving birth to the cub whale. That. And she described it in intricate detail and really felt she was the whale. And she was no marine biologist, but when she described it, and then Stan Grof, the founder of Breathwork, he looked into how whales actually birth and was struck at how incredibly accurate, even to the point she said the baby cub came out tail first. Now, this seems very counterintuitive.
One could say that she's watched a documentary and she can't remember.
One could say that, and yet it didn't seem, and this is the thing about this kind of, it's all very, but it's only through the collation of these kind of non-ordinary states of experiences we can often be skeptical, but there's certainly been times where it's been proven that the individual really couldn't have gained that access anywhere else.
I actually intuitively believe we are all interconnected, so that's one train of thought I'd love to go down, in one area that I'd love to study and figure out. Yes. Definitely. Very interesting. The next question I was going to ask you was about breath work. Only the last few months I came across breath work because I've been a very highly functioning anxiety person with anxiety for 15 to 20 years, 15 years. So breath work. Where did breath work start? You just mentioned a name, and what can breath work do for people? And I've got a few questions after that.
Well, I think breathwork's been around for a very long time. I mean,
mainstream society is only now talking about it.
Yeah, and yet the yogis and the Chinese medicine, I'm sure in shamanic, probably even in the indigenous of this country, have used some form of breathwork without a doubt.
Have we forgotten to breathe as a society?
I dare say we have. I think, in that high stress state and our kind of contraction against life, I don't think we're breathing all that well. But breath work is, to my mind, one of the most incredible therapeutic modalities there is. I feel like you can do the most effective trauma work because it creates such an incredible vehicle for the body being able to figure out a way to release trauma. But it's also where we access the transpersonal domains, where we can go into spiritual experiences. Breath work, certain forms of breath work seem consistently to create a situation that is strikingly similar to psychedelic experiences. So quite extraordinary. Yeah. So.
Sharna, there's a lot of people offering 6-week courses online, and I know that's an insult in many different industries when you come across a 6-week program. We spoke about the pros and the cons, which were mainly the cons to last week, about how things can go wrong. People can have episodes, things can occur, and you want to make sure that you're fully qualified to take over someone, take care of someone in these instances. What can occur during breathwork, please?
Well, yes, this has been a concern for me because breathwork is one of the most powerful modalities there is and can take people into states of consciousness that are very far beyond what the everyday consciousness. So you really want to have facilitators that are able to be efficient guides and really be able to manage any safety concerns in order to do that incredibly safely. The dangers can be sometimes that you really open up the portals into another dimension and you have trouble integrating that.
So you come back and you're shook.
Yeah, you're shook or you're stuck in a kind of mindset that you can't quite. It's very unusual.
It's like an acid experience or LCD experience.
Yeah,
wow,
so that's where
then.
we sometimes need a hell of a lot of support after a breath work. Breathwork is not suitable for people who have had any recent manic episodes or psychotic episodes because they can really just expand that consciousness exponentially and accentuate those symptoms. So there are, and even certain medical conditions, there's certain heart problems. And
there's a lot.
There's a lot. So my training was with someone who was a psychiatrist, so had quite a medical training. And that's where I was grateful in my training that there was so much emphasis on the safety and really making sure that you eliminated all risk factors, which I don't think done with all modalities.
Well, thankfully you're a psychologist. I'm lucky that you're a psychologist. You put in the hard work and you study so many different things. Because I really wanted to study breathwork, but unfortunately I'm not the type that wants to study 5-6 years. I'm doing so many different things online.
Yes.
But if I would have loved to do breathwork and offer breathwork. Firstly for myself. Secondly, I think it's really valuable. But judging by what you say, you can't do it. 6-week thing, don't bother. You really got to go deep down into it.
Yes, I think there's forms of breathwork, like Wim Hof is a form of breathwork that is
and he goes deep into it too. He's been practicing for years.
Yes, and his is a shorter form of breathwork where you do like 3 cycles. Mine, what I did is like, lying on a mattress and breathing, hyperventilating for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
So there are forms of breathwork which maybe would be safer or more appropriate to do in as a shorter training. It's just the ones that really take you into very strong non-ordinary states of consciousness that you probably want a very thorough training.
I think I'm just going to do a couple of sessions with you in the future and just focus on my businesses instead, because I don't have 1 or 2 years or even longer to invest to that. I've got enough on my plate.
I think you found your calling anyway.
Absolutely.
You're out there promoting and
Don't know whether it's my calling or not, but we're definitely going to talk about that because that's part of the questions I've got for you.
Okay.
Sharna, can you please, if possible, show us an example of what breath work for anybody who deals with anxiety and is breathing shallow on a daily basis? Is there something simple that they can take from this and start doing here with us?
Okay, well, it wouldn't be like the kind of breath work I've just talked about, but often when we're anxious, the energy is really up into our chest. So what I really suggest, and if you'd like to do it with me,
I'd love to.
Putting your hands on your belly. And just imagine trying to bring the energy from the chest down to the belly while similarly breathing.
Close your eyes, guys.
Very intentionally into the belly and accentuating the movement of the belly, the belly going out on the inhale and coming in on the exhale.
Feels great. But you can't do this in public, can you? Unless you open your eyes.
Well, you could just begin focusing on bringing the breath down to the belly in public. Yes, you don't have to have your eyes closed. But then also I suggest that not only you accentuate the movement in the belly, but you try to lengthen the exhale. Really slowing down the exhale.
Slowing down the exhale. Stomach's supposed to go in on the exhale, isn't it?
In on the exhale, and out on the inhale.
And drop your shoulders and relax.
Yeah, it's like almost you wanting to, and sometimes then I say bring it now down to the perineum, which is where the base chakra between the sexual organs and the anus, and same thing, breathing into that space in your pelvic floor and feeling expansion on the in-breath, a slight contraction on the out-breath, and it's just a way of also now grounding the energy.
So breathing all the way in, taking the energy in all the way down.
Yep, and breathing, imagine that breath going to your perineum, right at the center of your pelvic floor, and connected with our base chakra, which is where our sense of security, belonging, feeling connected to the ground is coming from. And often in, heightened states, we're often now in our heads, aren't we? So it's about grounding the energy and slowing it down and bringing the breath from the energy from the chest and more down to the belly.
Okay, so I'm going to be practicing that in my spare time, and I hope that you guys can practice that. And in the comments, once you do, let us know how you found it. Obviously, it takes a lot of mindfulness or work. Yeah. Would mindfulness be the correct word, or are you supposed to let go of mind? Jesus Christ.
I know, I agree. I think they should.
Go of mindfulness.
Yeah, it should be mindfulness. It should be mindlessness. Absolutely. I think they got it wrong with that. Actually,
mindfulness for when we're trying to be kind with others, but mindlessness when we're trying to let go.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey Sharna, I wanted to ask you about psychedelics. A lot of people are talking about psychedelics, from LSD to mushrooms to acids. I personally tried one thing once in my life. It was the most horrible experience of my life, which I just told you about. Can you tell us about the dangers of psychedelics and the alternatives?
Well, in this era of psychedelics research, we're in what's been called the second renaissance, moving on from the 60s, where the first kind of scientific or more westernized psychological research was taking place from. In this era, we're really understanding the need for setting and integration supports to be there. And your experience highlighted
horrific,
poorly handled, terrible setting, very ineffectual and dangerous providers who were projecting a lot onto your experience. And yes, it becomes a horror show. I think psychedelics have a lot to promise us, and
Let me just jump in what she said. When I woke up from that experience, the first thing I said to my cousin was, if I don't recover, I'm going to kill myself. For someone to say they're going to kill themselves if they don't recover, that's how dangerous it can be. Exactly. I didn't want to live.
Exactly. And yet I don't think it was necessarily the substance, but just how
it
poorly.
Was the setting. And what I saw. Yeah.
Exactly. So, a lot of promises, but unbelievably or reassuringly, we do have so many techniques that can create these non-ordinary states of consciousness similar to psychedelics, very startlingly similar to psychedelics, through the breath work in particular certain meditation techniques. I've started training in Kundalini yoga and can't believe how much that kind of opens one up to really mystical, blissful, getting high off your breath.
That'll be awesome.
So, and you'll be joining us next Saturday for a breathwork.
Can't wait.
And maybe that will be the...
Absolutely. I'll be coming to see the breathwork episodes sessions quite soon. So I'll be recording one of them, whichever one that is open to being recorded, because it's a private experience. Awesome. Thanks, Sharna, for letting us know. So, guys, be careful before you go down the psychedelic path.
Yeah.
Try the things that she mentioned.
Yeah. Make sure the setting is right. And,
just don't do it. Try breathwork or Kundalini.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So, I'm very interested in astrology. I've been down that rabbit hole, and obviously you have too. You provide astrological. What do you provide, Sharna?
Well, I use astrology in the context of psychotherapy.
Therapeutic astrology. Please explain.
Well, look, at first, what it be astrology is very controversial.
Love astrology.
And I'm willing to admit it shouldn't work, but it just does.
Why shouldn't it work? Back in the days, the kings and queens hired astrologers.
Precisely. And so it's this mysterious language. The cosmos has unbelievably given us a code in which we can understand certain events and energies and archetypal principles that seem to be being experienced in one's life. The biggest misconception with astrology, I believe, is that the planets are influencing us. where in fact there's just a mirroring, there's a synchronicity. Most astrologers believe it's more that what's being inscribed in the sky is simply mirroring our individual experience, as above, so below. And so what I love about astrology is that whatever the client, one of my clients may be struggling with, it is most times that I'll be able to see with the natal chart and the transits what particular planetary archetype is at play. And not only do I think it helps to describe in a much more poetic, friendly language, because as I said before, psychology uses a very mechanistic language. It's all disorders, diseases, and having one feel terribly diagnosed and frightened about what they're struggling with. But with astrology,
you said that well, it does have a poetic feel.
Yeah, it's symbolically there. And it will also, give you a sense that there's a reason behind that, part of your life experience is to be working with different archetypal energies, some that feel, incredibly fortunate, some not so much.
Are you able to know anything off the bat if I tell you my date of birth, or do you need your charts and your books and things?
Oh, yeah, no, I'd need to look at your charts and your exact time of birth.
Oh, God.
And we'll do that sometime.
Well, what if I don't have my exact time of birth?
And we can still look at it. There's still a lot of information. We just can't look at the houses so reliably. Okay. But yes, but you are a very Aries.
Yeah.
And Aries is here to be the pioneer, has a very straightforward manner, here to inspire.
Yeah, and I'm glad that, I'm really glad that she understands so much, because I feel comfortable around her because she can understand these things. It's great when we have knowledge in all different areas, because if someone doesn't, they might think, the Aries is too intense, too direct, when we're not trying to be rude. It's just how we are.
Well, this is right.
I was hungry. I said, can we go halfies and then your cake? I don't even wait to be offered. It's just how we are.
Yeah, straightforward. Yeah. I like that about Aries.
Thanks.
That's the other thing. Astrology lends you feeling more compassionate to others, less judgmental.
You understand them more.
Yeah.
What are you?
Aquarius.
Love that, okay.
Very Aquarius. Even what we're doing right now is very Aquarius.
Wow.
Being a psychologist.
And I might need an Aquarius in my life.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this is what I love.
I'm very proud of Aquarius.
Love that. I once was seeing an Aquarius guy, but he wasn't deep, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe my Cancer moon is where the depths.
Oh, Cancer is great.
Yeah.
Oh, Dad's a Cancer. All right. Here's a question, and I'll give you a second to think about it. Why do you think someone would be struggling to find out what their purpose is and what their why is? Oftentimes, getting philosophical here, I haven't been able to figure out my why or purpose, and I felt disassociated. I felt like maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm broken because everybody else seems to know what their why or their purpose is. What's the answer? It's a philosophical / mainstream question, and there's lots of pressure in the entrepreneurial world about this.
Exactly. Well, I think one of the great, problems of our Western conditioning was that we've set very early on on this path to becoming somebody.
Yes.
And then we automatically feel incomplete. And it's only when we finally become somebody that we're going to, feel that sense of completeness. And
I
wholeness.
am a somebody.
Yeah, you exist.
I'm a dichotomy who's interested in a million things. I don't need to do something to become somebody. Is that the answer?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what clouds our own ability to find what our purpose is, or what's going to give us the greatest joy, is that our minds are too much prone to being under the illusion of other people's ideas, or held captive by other people's ideas, other people's image of success and status. Even what our parents may have, shared with us.
Well, I want to give you something to think about. What about people like Oprah Winfrey, who talk about finding your purpose? That once you find your purpose, she talks about purpose. She believes in it. Do you think that that's just their opinion and there is no truth to it?
I think
do you think there is a purpose in your opinion?
I think there is, but I think maybe where we struggle is that we assume maybe the purpose that is really going to make us happy isn't good enough. It doesn't fit with society's, norm. Maybe your purpose is to be a cleaner and just enjoy
or just to seek truth.
And to seek truth, or to not improve your property portfolio, but we're under a lot of pressures from society, teachers, parents to live up to some kind of big expectation that we've got to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
I don't think selling real estate or being a cleaner, even though that was an example, could ever be someone's purpose. I think that life is so much more than selling.
Well, that's why
that's the laughable part.
Well, that's what I like about astrology, because wherever your sun sign is going to dictate your spirit's purpose.
Interesting. Mine is actress or motivational speaker and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, but I think it gets clouded when we're following another path. And that's why then we do then go into periods of, having the old-fashioned existential crisis where we kind of lose our way and go back to the drawing board. It's such a classic story when the story of doing what your parents tell you to do and being immensely dissatisfied with it, and then coming back and deciding, you know what, I'm here to just make really great cupcakes, and that's what I'm here to do. Yeah. Because I think we are creative beings, so I think we all have a unique creation to offer. But sometimes, we maybe need to think outside the square and maybe consult our astrology to...
Oh, love that. If anybody wants a reading, hit her up, sign her up. Sometimes I feel shame for saying that I don't know my purpose and my why. So and I'm going to publicly address that. I do. So if you're also someone that feels pressure or shame when people ask you on a podcast or in the entrepreneurial world, perhaps we can work towards not feeling shame. Exactly. I'm doing multiple things. I'm a very productive, proactive person. Why do we need to feel more shame on top of everything else that we already feel? Yeah, exactly. Just be, right? And we'll figure things out.
Precisely. I'm with you there.
Is what you do your purpose, would you say? All this stuff that you do?
Yeah, well, my astrology. I think I'm living out my Aquarius sun pretty well at the moment.
Well, guess what? She's doing what she enjoys. So perhaps it's true about go where your passion is. Because mine is seeking truth too. She asked me before, Sharna, she goes, oh, am I doing okay on the interview? Because she doesn't get on many podcasts. I go, you're doing fantastic. And she's got no idea how much I love this conversation. Because everything I'm asking her is what I'm passionate about. So if I can continue doing this right here, this is my absolute passion. Okay. Sharna, what do you think the purpose of intimate relationships are? Relationships.
Oh, wow.
Have you figured it out yet?
Not really. Wow. Yeah, I subscribe to that. It's an part of, looking that ancient journey of looking for your soulmate or the beloved.
Do you think soulmates exist?
Not sure.
Interesting.
But I think it's the search of finding the beloved within. But I do believe that it can be the most incredible vehicle for learning deeply about yourself. Let's face it, with relationships, it's where any issue that's been buried or not addressed, it's certainly going to be in that arena. So they are so useful for our evolutionary process. I think I've heard the Dalai Lama say that he doesn't really think he'll become fully self-realized this lifetime because he hasn't been in relationships. Almost like he's admitting that he's kind he hasn't done the full program.
Well done to him for realizing that.
Yeah, so relationships, they bloody well hurt a lot of the times and get very complicated. But yeah, I think the opportunity is to really learn a lot about yourself and evolve through the other.
Very interesting. I have nothing to add to that. I agree with you. It's an interesting subject. Sharna, there's a lot going on online in the world of social media and YouTube in regards to emotionally unavailable people and fearful avoidance. I studied this subject for a little while because I was dealing with an emotionally unavailable or fearful avoidant person until I discovered that I'm also a little bit avoidant. Hence why I probably attracted an avoidant person. So I want to ask you, and there's different degrees of fearful avoidant and emotionally unavailable people. Have you dealt with any clients like that? Where do you think it comes from? For anyone watching this and they identify as an emotionally avoidant person who runs away from relationships when it gets hot and heavy, or they're scared of being seen, or whatever the case is for you guys.
Well, firstly, I'd say those attachment theories, they've certainly come up into this. Well, they're a bit oversimplified. We're really fixated. I think there's a good thing in the last, I think a book came out. And so in the last few years, I'm seeing a lot of clients come to me saying, I think I've got an insecure attachment or an ambivalent attachment style. And yet, there's a fundamental truth to them. But the cause is always quite different. Like even with the avoidant attachment style, the psychodynamics of it can be caused by dismissive attachment figures, like perhaps a dismissive parental figure, mother or father, or an over-involved. So it's really hard to pinpoint. That's where I think there's a little bit more nuance that needs to be given to those attachment styles. But I think on a more humanistic level, I think the avoidance really represents an attempt to protect your heart.
Yeah.
In the archetypal psychologist James Hillman, who's a huge figure in transpersonal psychology, he says true love is a broken heart.
True love is a broken heart.
And
why?
because the cost of love is always loss. If you fall truly, truly in love, as much as it will bring you happiness, the degree that it brings you happiness would be, by the same token, probably proportionately the same degree you're going to experience suffering from it. Love is not easy, and I think in this day and age, when people are really avoidant and trying to protect themselves,
You just don't want to be hurt.
They don't want to be hurt, and they have an instinctual sense that if you really become attached to someone, it comes at a high cost. I think we're
How come I don't care about the risk of something going wrong, but those types will?
Because you're courageous. Your heart is courageous, and you've got that capacity within you. But
I will bounce back. That's my mindset, no matter what.
Exactly. So that's and it does mean it's gonna get chewed up. But I think we're all so scared of rejection.
Yes.
It's the one thing as a psychologist that it seems
or
that a lot of these
whatever.
Defense mechanisms are against the experience of rejection, which unfortunately only kind of perpetuates the enactment of rejection, the enactment of trying to reject people before they reject you, or feeling, seduced by someone and then kind of spat out. And where, a lot of our defense mechanisms.
I've had a friend who was seeing a guy, and the guy spends all his time with her but doesn't want to be officially with her, and he doesn't open up either. So we were thinking that perhaps, he's got a lot going on, but also perhaps he just says, I think he's scared of getting hurt. But the point is, it's just bizarre to me. Why would you want to spend all your time with someone but not make it official? It just doesn't make sense to me.
A lot of times it is unconscious. The individual themselves hasn't chosen. We don't get to choose our defense mechanisms. So often these defenses, these attachment styles are, for some people, and this is the distinction I think people, rather than just knowing another person that you're seeing's attachment style and trying to measure your compatibility off that, it's really how much awareness and insight you have about how conscious you are of that defense mechanism. It seems to be the greatest cause for rupturing and dysfunction in relationship is when someone is completely unconscious of these defenses.
Absolutely. When they're not conscious that they're even doing things that sabotage what they truly do want or what they enjoy.
And sadly, that is a lot of people are like that. They don't know. They are being very earnest in the initial stages of a relationship, and their heart manages to open. And then all of a sudden, there's just a closing off, and they themselves can't even tell you why that's occurred.
Thank God I don't have that issue. I've got other ones, but not that one. Cheers. All right, cool. So there's something very interesting that Sharna said. The most beautiful people get rejected the most. Sharna, according to statistics or psychology, what did you say about this?
Oh, okay. I have discovered as a psychologist, when we get rejected, we always assume the worst case scenarios to why we've been rejected. I'm not good enough. They didn't like the way I looked. They think they can get someone better than me. I'm not smart enough.
Whatever the reason is for you, yeah.
And yet, as a psychologist, what I am struck about is that sometimes it is often the people who are most emotionally intelligent, have this quality of purity, and are really able to offer a very deep, true love and a beautiful people.
Yeah.
They're the ones getting chewed up the most a lot of the time. So,
and that is because
I think, as I said before, people they don't always have the capacity to meet with someone whose intention and who's really offering true love. When you're really there going, let's do this, let's really commit and see where this goes.
They might not be ready to receive you.
They may not, that's it. That's what it comes down to. And yet, we often walk away just, thinking the worst things.
But you're the
it.
defect, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting, just very interesting what you said. We would have never thought that.
Yeah. So it's been my one gift as a psychologist with my own history of being rejected.
Yes.
That it's like, actually, it's probably due to some really beautiful or evolved or
purity,
valuable,
everything that you bring to the table.
That scares some of them off. At least I'd like to think that.
I'm
sure there's other, there's always probably things to contradict that.
Don't ruin it for me. I was going to take that away. It's a definite.
Yeah, it's definite.
So, Sharna, you said that you need to deal with rejection. People need to deal with rejection and not suppress their feelings. And you went on a beautiful tangent before when you started speaking about what comes from actually feeling your feelings. So I'll rephrase the question. How do you deal with rejection? You said you're supposed to feel it. Many of us suppress it.
Yes, well, the feeling of rejection is like a crushed flower. And when you really go into it, we're scared. We avoid going into it because it's like one of our deepest wounds.
You don't want to feel your bad feelings.
I know. It feels like the deepest wound. But when you really attend to it, you get this beautiful reflection back of yourself, because usually it's highlighting your care for the situation. Like if you've had a 3-year relationship and suddenly the person's left you, then your heart bleeding over the situation is actually showing you how much you loved the other person. It's even also conveying your self-love in a strange way. And I also think you go deep enough into that, you usually understand why someone may have hurt you because of their lack of capacity to love, as we were saying before. I really believe in the notion that hurt people. And when we go into our hurt, we kind of can see that, the cost of really being able to care for another person, it ain't for cowards. And if you've got that capacity to feel a broken heart, well, despite how agonizing it is,
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's your greatest gift.
Absolutely. Love that.
It means you love. To love well is to live in service to a broken heart.
I think I'm definitely a poet, because I think what point is there to life if there is no love?
Exactly, precisely.
Absolutely.
But it's not easy. And the reason love is profound, because it isn't easy, because it does result in pain. That's why if it was easy, it wouldn't be profound.
Exactly.
It's because it is so life-threatening and dangerous, and the stakes are so high. And that to love is always going to cause the same degree of suffering. That's why it's profound.
So for anybody dealing with some heartache at the moment, dealing with rejection, or dealing with someone who didn't want them, or feeling blue, what is something that you can say to them to feel their feelings rather than doing what they do, which is suppress and say, no, I'm fine?
I would suggest that they take a moment to really just find the most vulnerable sensation that they have in their body related to that situation, and to really just go in with like a non-conceptual awareness. Most of our problems stem from us just manipulating our inner experience, poking our inner experience with our mind rather than actually letting it speak for itself. So sometimes if I'm processing something like this with a client, I'll get them to close their eyes and really find the most vulnerable sensation, vibration or animation, and to hold it like a baby bird in the palms of their hand, and to just be with it, like literally just to sit with it without resisting it. And a spontaneous kind of healing process comes about often just through that attendance. But we avoid, we think we're going to get stuck there. We avoid going to these most vulnerable places because we think if we do, we'll never get out.
I agree.
But actually, the quickest way is the way through it, and to actually go into it. Sometimes things then need to burp out, like, you know, sometimes then we've all had that good cry that
burp it out, the emotions,
and then feel better afterwards.
Yeah.
So by just attending that movement of then, you know, the deep sorrow and the tears and even the sobbing can come through, and suddenly it doesn't feel so heavy. But we do ourselves a great disservice when we refuse to go to those vulnerable places.
I wasn't aware that I was suppressing so hard until we had that conversation. And for anybody watching this, since I wasn't aware, you might not be aware. So how it looks like is like this. I'm so focused on work. I'm so focused on getting shit done. I don't have time to mourn the loss of anybody. I will be upset, then I'll get the hell over it. So I've got this mindset, right, of just doing, because I don't have time to sit in bed. That's what I think for 7 days straight and be upset. Or even 1 hour. I don't want to be sad. But how are you gonna heal? How are you going to get rid of the resentment, the anger, or whatever? How are you going to stop feeling rejected, whatever it is that you're feeling, if you don't take that time out to actually feel your feelings?
Yes.
Did I describe that good for the, you know?
But to be fair, there is time to distract yourself. We all have to put on a brave face sometimes. So that's the dance.
And everything.
That's the dance. You know, sometimes it really is too overwhelming to go into. But where true healing comes when we can really it's actually more simple than we even realize. You just got to feel it.
Just feel it. Make some time to feel it. Right?
Exactly.
Make some time to feel it. Love that. Perfect. Out of curiosity, do you follow the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza?
I don't follow it, but what I do like about it, I haven't done any of his programs, but a lot of clients have brought him to my attention.
Oh, okay.
And I like that he talks about the inner healing intelligence. I don't know how
he's into the metaphysical.
Yes.
And brave enough to bring it into the academic world and space. Judge, you know, he gets judged for it.
And the neuroplasticity. Yes. And he really appeals to male populations. I think he's a good personal development
he appeals
figure.
To me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure both. But yeah, it's good to see the
Definitely
young
both,
blokes getting into the, you know,
absolutely.
the personal development.
Yeah. It's cool. I want to ask you that. Sharna, why do you think body dysmorphia exists and it's on the rise? Do you think it's due to mainstream media, filters, magazines? What is body dysmorphia? Why does it exist?
That's probably not my area of expertise. But my sense is it is a symptom expressing how much we've come to be identified with the body.
Okay.
And that we place all emphasis on this little flesh encapsulated ego of our body representing everything about ourselves, which from a spiritual perspective is something that isn't considered to be the truth. But yeah, we live in a society that, and even we interact with other people where this body of ours is considered, the main symbol of who the person is. And yes, of course, the media saturation.
Everything.
And
it's heavy. It can come from childhood trauma, media, a whole series of things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's as simple as that. In many ways, it's just the brainwashing, the younger people. I know from being born in the early 80s, I think I managed to escape some of the high saturation of
You were born in the 80s?
Yes, I think
I was too.
But I think the generations like after, when there's been more social media and so forth, they're getting a much denser saturation. Probably, you know, back in if we were born in the 60s, we probably wouldn't have had as much as it. And then let's face it, in the medieval times, you probably, who knows how much you would have cared.
There was no social media filter. There wasn't so much pressure.
Yeah.
Do you think the EDMR thing that you spoke about would help anybody with body dysmorphia who sees himself differently, doesn't feel comfortable inside their body?
Yeah, conceivably, especially if it's related to childhood trauma. And EMDR is really good for identifying the very belief that is causing the symptom and kind of desensitizing it. So if you can really access what belief if it's just I'm not good enough, I'm bad, or and then you use the process with that. But yeah, it's a very complex presentation.
Okay, sure. Sharna, if someone has an issue with intimacy, what's your first tip or advice you have for them? What can they start doing if they have issues with intimacy? Not just sexual intimacy, one-on-one situations, social phobia kind of environments. Intimacy, sitting one-on-one with people, not feeling comfortable, or even in groups, but I prefer one-on-one.
I'm going to sound like Brene Brown here, but her work, Brene Brown's work was, the one trait that could really measure your capacity for being in a relationship and being able to live an authentic life is your capacity for vulnerability.
Wow.
And so I think we live in a very vulnerability avoidant culture. And I think a lot of these kind of coping defense mechanisms which cut one off or even have one feel quite socially anxious maybe stem from that. So my suggestion would be is to cultivate vulnerability by being honest with yourself. And vulnerability isn't like being a victim and being woe is me. It's just realizing and being humble enough to realize that you don't have all the answers. We're all kind of fumbling in the dark, and if we can all show up towards each other and have the vulnerability and the safety to be vulnerable, because it's not always safe to be vulnerability. You don't want to put your vulnerability in just anyone's hands.
No.
But find spaces where vulnerability is cultivated. Celebrated, held well and safely, so that you can get more comfortable. I'm in a yoga training, and it's an extraordinary space because vulnerability is so embraced, and the level of connection and depth of friendship that comes from that is mind-blowing. So vulnerability I think is what it's all about when it comes to intimacy.
That was a fantastic answer, and I loved how you said, firstly, be in a cultivating space, a space where they're also open to being vulnerable, because I have not been able to be vulnerable within a space where they're all closed off and acting narcissistic or whatever. So in a safe space like this, that's why I'm vulnerable here or somewhere else. With my spiritual friends or people that are open with me, I'm open too. So find a place that's cultivating your vulnerability, open. And vulnerability means being real, being humble, taking off the pretentious hat, and just not acting like we've all got the answers, but contributing to one another.
And you touched upon narcissism, which we're seeing a lot of. There's a Harvard professor who's really pushing hard for narcissistic personality disorder to be renamed vulnerability avoidance disorder, because that is what is at the heart of that pathology. It's a defense mechanism against vulnerability. And that's why it's not safe to be with someone who's vulnerability avoidant, because they will weaponize and certainly play like a fiddle. But it's a sad pathology that's been exacerbated by a culture that kind of has revered an avoidance of vulnerability. Even if you look at leaders and CEOs, and
absolutely,
they're not often demonstrating much vulnerability a lot of the times. And we've got to change that in our culture, that we start seeing vulnerability and empathy as some of the most important evolutionary traits, and start expecting them more in our leaders, teachers, CEOs.
I'm going to make sure that vulnerability gets implemented in Mindset 2.0, our podcast. I've never liked too much vulnerability, but I definitely see importance in that. So I'm going to be taking on board, guys. So maybe you can too, in whatever it is that you do. All right? Change starts with us.
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. All right. So I'm making Sharna exhausted. I've only got a couple of questions left, guys. I'll leave it at this one. We'll leave the mystical question for another time. What's your favorite quote of all time that inspires you and helps you have faith and stay motivated? What is something in your bathroom? I saw the Frida quote. What's one of your favorite quotes?
One I've been chewing on a lot lately, and apparently may have come from the Buddha's mouth himself. It is, and it seems to be the formula for enlightenment. But anyway, it's just recognize that everything is ungraspable and stop trying to perfect yourself.
Just recognize that everything is ungraspable and
stop trying to perfect yourself.
Wow. Now I'd like to say, why is everything ungraspable?
Because it's a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way you can really enjoy it is as a mystery.
Who said this?
I say that.
Was this from Buddha or no?
This is one of the fundamental principles of Buddhism is that that one has to really let go of trying to grasp, make sense of things with the mind. It's the grasping, the judging, resisting. Whereas if we can drop all of that, and then that's the only way we can be in the present moment anyway. It's the only thing that gets us out of the past and or the future is to let go of that reference point in the past.
So trying to grasp things, control things, figure things out.
Yeah, and trying to build a better future and trying to get a peek around the corner. No one ever gets a peek around the corner. And it's only here in this present moment that we can have the freedom that we've all been looking for. But we have to drop
all of that.
We have to drop our meaning-making mind to be able to access that. So sitting comfortably in the mystery is what it's all about.
When she first said that, I was going to argue the Buddha on that. I was going to say, my mind wants to say something, but then I figured out it's true. Even if you think that there are things that you can grasp and get, such as love, well, even love ends one day when the person dies or when it ends. Even life, we die. So they do have some, that does make sense.
Yeah.
Just live in the now. The now is all we have.
We're not taking any with us.
No, exactly. The now is all we have. Sharna, loved having you on this episode.
So much. Me too.
And can't wait to do more things with you. Next week I'll be at her breath workshop and we'll get some content and keep you guys posted. Thank you, Sharna. And guys, follow Sharna on social media. She's going to be a little bit more active on social media online. And if you're in Melbourne, contact details are below. Reach out to Sharna or come to one of the breath workshops.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Bye.